I'm Hugh Thomas, and I'm a partner at Carey Olsen in Jersey. I practice in employment law and data protection and a lot of stuff that my partners like to call the weird stuff. This is our podcast, People, Behaviour and Governance, which is a podcast about people in organisations, how they behave and how we should think about that behaviour. Today's guest is Ben Dixon, who's both General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer at Systematica Investments. Welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Thank you.
So I suppose we should start with the question that every private practice lawyer likes to ask our in-house colleagues. Why in-house? Why on earth in-house?
It was a realization very early in my career, really. I trained at Allen Overy and then moved to a US firm on qualification, mostly working in corporate and mergers and acquisitions. And the thing that I realized very early working with those companies for, the 6, 12, whatever month period of the deal was that I enjoyed understanding about those companies, why they were making the decisions they were making, what the key principles were thinking about when they were in the deals. And I wanted to be closer to that process. And the problem is, as a deal lawyer, you go in for the period and you come out again and you might not see the company again across from the desk. So that led me in 2005 to take a role in-house with Bluecrest at the time in London, in what was then still the relatively unknown world of hedge funds. And 20 years later, I'm still doing it, still enjoying it.
And has it delivered on that
I think target? It has. I think I don't think I would have had the breadth of experience that I've had in-house in private practice. On any given day, in any industry, an in-house lawyer will see way more than their private practice counterpart. And you're closer to the decision-making process. I'm very lucky now that I sit on the board and of Exco, of our investment manager based here in Jersey. So I see a lot of the very high-level stuff. But, throughout my career in-house, I've been involved much closer to the decision-making process. Why are we doing this? What's the commercial and strategic rationale that I just wouldn't see otherwise?
And General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer, and I think most organisations and most people would consider those to be two separate and very much full-time roles.
Yeah.
How do you go about combining them?
And it's a challenge we get from the regulators sometimes as well. I think it works very well. I think given the highly complex nature of regulation these days, compliance teams work very closely with their legal counterparts anyway. For us, it came out of necessity on day one, really. We span out back in 2015 and we only had 60 plus people. So we were still building the corporate infrastructure around the investment team. And on day one in Jersey, I was the general counsel, but we also needed a compliance officer. So I was chief compliance officer because I was the only compliance officer. And then it's kind of morphed from there. We face 7 regulators globally, and it's very helpful to have someone who's senior, knows the business inside out, has built the business facing off against those regulators. Yes, I've got a compliance team who deal with the very technical day-to-day stuff, but I think if you want that consistency across the piece for the regulators, you need someone of that seniority and experience.
And how do you see the role of general counsel? What is it to be a general counsel in an organisation like yours?
I think the keys in the general part, it can be anything. It's everything from technical lawyer and advisor all the way through to the counsel part, the why are we thinking this? What are we thinking about? What are our various options? Are we going down the wrong avenue here? And it depends on what it is on any given day. I think there's probably less and less technical law in what I do these days and more commerciality. But it is just dealing with any problem that comes up. On any given day, it could be, a problem with one of our regulators all the way through to a supplier's not playing ball on something, very menial on a normal commercial contract. It's just being that linchpin for the business, but also understanding the business appetite for risk. And this is probably the key distinction between a private practice lawyer. I know what the business can and can't accept on a risk profile. So something that someone might think, well, I need to review that. I know we just don't care about it and we can move on. But that's only a call with someone with that commercial insight can take.
Yeah. So, most people would think about general counsel to be a purely technical role, advising on legal risk. But as you said, it's evolved substantially beyond that. And is that just the way it's evolved, or is it more to do with the way in which your industry works, do you think?
I think it varies business to business. I think, you will find some general counsel or in-house counsel, in fact, aren't as close as that decision-making process. given that we're still a large investment manager, we've got in excess of $11 billion under management, we've actually got a relatively small headcount. There's only 140 of us. And the management team is even smaller. There's 6 or 7 key management team. So in our business, the legal process is very much entwined in the commercial process. I think it might be more formally divided in other businesses, but you will always have that intermix of commerciality and legal.
Do you think there's a risk in becoming too much part of the commercial decision-making sort of machinery?
There can be, and it's certainly conversations I've had with regulators in the past. How are you managing the conflict between, sitting as CCO or sitting as general counsel and sitting as a board member? But the point of that is, you understand the conflicts, you manage the conflict, and you can step back from it and say, no, this is what I'd advise as a lawyer, but this is what I'm saying with my commercial hat on now, and recognise the difference between the two.
It's a very clear distinction between being part of the decision-making structure and being part of this sort of advisory element.
Absolutely. And again, that comes down to also, I've got a team behind me. So, I'm receiving their advice, their input. We've got external counsel working on things. So quite often what you're doing is combining all of that thinking with your risk profile as well and coming up with a decision based on that.
And you mentioned earlier sort of the challenge sort of part of your job, sort of testing decision making. Is that a critical part of what you do, being able to challenge what people are thinking?
Yeah, and I think, I've been very lucky that, legal and compliance to an extent have always been seen as a central part of the business. In some businesses, people avoid taking to legal and compliance, things to legal and compliance, because they think they're going to say no. Our starting point is always, we want to help the business do things. And if there's a reason that they're not aware of where something might be problematic, we work through that with them in order to get where they want. So yes, we have challenge, but not challenge to stop things, not challenge to stop commerciality or productivity, challenge for awareness sake. This is the risk we're taking. And then the business needs to take the decision as to whether that risk's acceptable. Now, obviously, when you get into the realms of illegality or breaching regulation, that then turns into a no for the business because we're a very compliant business. But they need to understand that risk spectrum in order to make that decision. So
it's avoided being that sort of computer says no sort of department, and more a constructive challenge sort of function.
And that's an ongoing process. That takes a long time to build that trust, and not very long to erode it. So you always need that conversation with business to maintain that level. I speak to our sales guys, our investment guys, our execution team, the senior investment professionals daily to kind of maintain that trust and maintain that understanding. So it's constant communication.
And you obviously need to advise on a number of jurisdictions, a huge number of different issues, which I assume ranges from the sort of business as usual to the standard legal black swan events that come sailing out the mists. How do you go about sort of allocating your time and resources? Because obviously you're a lean team, you're only one person.
Yeah, it's tough. We face 7 regulators globally. Yeah. We operate across 6 jurisdictions. Probably the joke answer is, you put out whichever fires the biggest first. But no, it's risk allocation again. It's what is the biggest problem? What is the biggest concern? What is the pressing commerciality? We need to close a deal for a client, or there's a problem with, some wording in a compliance policy that we need in 3 months' time. Well, where you're going to go. You're going to go to the point that makes you money. We very early set out with ESOF from later, which was we always put our clients first. So everything we do is client driven. And to an extent on the regulation side, if we do something wrong, we'll walk up to a regulator and explain why we made the mistake that we did, because we were putting the clients first. So that, again, is in the decision-making process about what our prioritization is. If it's client-driven, it's a priority. If it's BAU, we'll get to it once we've dealt with the clients. Yeah.
And is there a well-being issue for you personally? I know that's a less fashionable thing to talk about, but of course, if you're not fit and well, then your effectiveness goes down. So, most legal jobs will take all of your time and energy and more. Is that an issue for you?
It definitely was at the outset. I think anyone who knows me well would say I'm a bit of a perfectionist and probably a bit of a control freak, and that made delegating quite hard for me to start with. I've learned that skill as my team's grown, as the business has developed, as I've developed over the years. the one thing I've always said to my team is, just because I work in a certain way doesn't mean I want you to copy that, and doesn't mean it's appropriate. If I send emails out of hours, I don't expect you to reply. It's just my way of working. And they're very clear on that. And also, I don't agree in presenteeism. You're there to do work. If you don't have work to do, you don't need to be there. If you're there at 9, 10 o'clock at night, just because, that's wrong. How do I balance that? I like staying on top of things. I prefer knowing about the fire before it even starts, knowing about the embers or whatever. That's just my way of working. I could probably do with switching off more. It's just the way I've worked for a long time now.
I think every lawyer would probably give the same answer. They could do with switching off more. And the way that the modern world works is sort of instant communication is, of course, makes it very, very difficult to be truly out of the office, doesn't it?
I think that's why it's important. I say, and if you get any of my team in to talk about this, I say, if you're ill, you're ill. You're not working from home. You're off. You're recovering. If you're on holiday, you're on holiday. Do a handover before you go. If something massively urgent that comes up that we can't deal with, we might have to call you, but you're on holiday. And we do enforce that. When we get messages from people saying, "Oh, I'm just going to cover this while I'm out." No, you're not. Tell us what to do. We'll deal with it.
Yeah. And often it's a good risk practice as well, isn't it? That when people are out of the office, if things are not quite working as they should, it becomes rapidly obvious. Whereas if they take it with them, it perhaps becomes less obvious. This is a podcast about sort of people's behaviour, and we obviously now live in a world which has a lot more unknown things in it. And I'm always reminded of Donald Rumsfeld's quote about the three types of knowledge: the known knowns, the known unknowns, and then the scary stuff, which is the unknown unknowns. Obviously, we're in a world where there's a lot more unknown things, particularly as a result of sort of certain behaviours amongst certain heads of states and governments. Has that changed your role? That greater volatility, the greater unpredictability of what's going on out there, or is it just made you more important?
I think it's made a lot harder for businesses. I think the increase in regulation has made the barrier to entry for businesses very hard. I think the lack of predictability and certainty that we've seen over the last few years, be it in financial markets or edicts coming out of the regulators, everyone got very excited the other year about the private fund advisor rule in the States, and then that all went away. We spent like 2 years worrying about it, and then it went away. So an inordinate amount of work and stress went into that, and then it just disappeared. Obviously, this year we're dealing with, the impact on financial markets of essentially whatever tweet or whatever post on X comes out on a day-to-day basis. That is causing problems. We've had to deal with queries from regulators about how the funds are performing in those stress conditions. It creates different challenges, but it also means, there's basically no regulatory agenda in the US at the moment. So, we're just kind of
day-to-day.
Yeah. Dealing with day-to-day. It just changes. We're always looking at the horizon as to what the next problem is going to be. But I think, you've got to make sure you're just running your business the best you can in the most robust fashion that you can in order to respond when these things happen.
Yeah, because for me, you go back to that Donald Rumsfeld quote, and the bit he leaves out is the stuff that things we don't want to know, that we're in denial about, and that sort of thing. Do you find it's important to be upfront and honest about the stuff we might not want to think about?
Totally. And we're a data-driven business. The whole purpose of our business is to understand why things perform in the way they do and try and predict how they're going to perform in the future. Yeah. And we apply that across all areas of the business. We're very focused on errors as part of our business, and identifying them at whatever level they arise so that we can try and prevent them in the future. And people are quite surprised sometimes at the amount of time we spend looking at those errors, but we see them as, ways of preventing much bigger problems in the future.
Yeah. Avoiding backing up a mistake with another mistake. And
completely. And then, Yeah.
And that, I assume, just requires more and more adaptation for a risk function in a more volatile and less predictable world.
Totally. I think, our risk committee, is probably, and our chief risk officer is probably the busiest person in the firm currently, looking at the various scenarios and where performance might go, given events that, we're trying to predict happening or not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose in today's world, just living with that level of volatility there's only so much risk management you can do, I assume. And
Yeah, no, totally. And then it's about making sure the clients understand why the funds are performing in the way they're doing, and making sure they're happy with it. Again, back to the mantra of putting the client first.
Yeah. And in relation to the sort of kinds of people you deal with, and the kinds of people risk you think about, you've obviously got a range of different populations to think about. You've got your own employees, you've got your boards, your shareholders, your investors, you've got third parties in terms of counterparties, you've got advisors and regulators. Does behavioural risk factor into how you think about risk, the way people actually think and behave?
It does, and it comes back to the mantra of the firm, and this kind of is toned from the top, from later down. On day one, we set out to put our clients first, and to make sure our clients are happy. Now, that doesn't mean doing everything the client demands, but that means providing an excellent service, and we pride ourselves on our excellence for the clients who invest in our funds. And the point being that everything else should flow from that. If you're putting your clients first, you're not going to have conflicts of interest problems. You're not going to have the regulators banging down your door saying, why did you do this? Or why were you running this fund in that way versus that fund? You're going to have that clarity and certainty and transparency that the regulators require. And then that flows through to the shareholders. It flows through to the board, who will see that you've got a very well governed and run firm with happy clients. And then that flows through to the people, because your colleagues, your employees, understand the ethos of the business, enjoy working for the firm because it's an open and transparent place to work.
It's a difficult trick to accomplish, isn't it, in terms of being or hitting that sweet spot in terms of behaviour and risk and everything else, isn't it?
It is. I think we've been lucky, and I think whenever anyone joins us, over the years, I've had people tell me, I don't think you understand how lucky you are with the culture that you've got at your place. And this comes from, again, tone from the top. This is later. She drives that excellence agenda, but also with that personable side to it. She knows everybody in the business. She cares about everybody in the business, and that permeates and creates that strong cultural bond that we have across offices. We're in, as I said, 6 different jurisdictions, but we all still know each other very well. We have a monthly firm-wide meeting where Leda presents to the firm. We talk about, investment agendas that are going on, research things that we're going, and also fun. We have this thing we call System Action, which just promotes what people are doing in their spare time, be it, we've got some extreme athletes doing crazy sporting events all over the world, to people who are just amazing photographers and love traveling. So we get some amazing photos from all over the world. But it's about understanding our colleagues, appreciating their strengths, and working better together.
Yeah, and we're suddenly in a world where diversity and inclusion have suddenly become sort of slightly more sort of challenged concepts. But given that you're Jersey, Geneva, London, New York, Singapore, and Shanghai, that's quite a diverse population of colleagues, isn't it? I mean, it's
It is. I think we worked out we've got something like 37 nationalities across the firm. But we have a common theme and a common understanding and a common culture. Even when people come in, we don't hire the same people, because otherwise you're just hiring clones of, existing people. But they come in with the same work hard, play hard, enjoy working together, collegiate environment. I remember back at the start of COVID, and we were talking about how we were going to maintain the firm's identity when essentially we dispersed into 137, as we were at the time, home offices for however long the period was going to be. And Leda said, and she coined a phrase that we still talk about, she said the 3 C's, culture, compliance, and collaboration. And if you want to sum our firm up, that's it. You can throw excellence in it as well, but that comes out of those 3. But the culture is important to us. We like working together. We like working hard together. We like achieving things together. Collaboration, that's the point. We work together. We're a team. We're not a legal and compliance function. We're not a research function. We're not an investment function. We're all working together. We all know each other. We all appreciate our strengths. We all appreciate the weaknesses. And out of that comes this inbuilt compliance, because everybody wants to do the best thing for our clients, for our colleagues, for everybody else.
Yeah. And do you find that's easier to accomplish when people are in the office as opposed to sort of working at home, or is it a contested concept these days?
I think that's a problem question for any firm.
Yeah.
We are very much a firm to the collaboration point. We find it better when we work together in person. For my legal and compliance function, I always say we're a control function. And our business plays with live ammunition on the financial markets daily. I find it very hard to believe a control function can be as efficient if it's not on the floor with the traders who are trading. Those conversations that can only happen person to person are lost when you work from home. That's not to say there isn't a place from work from home. We have what we call manager-led flexibility. If one of my team says, I really need to get my head around these compliance policy updates, I just need to sit in a dark room for 5 hours and draft, I'm going to work from home and do that. Yeah, absolutely. But if we've got, if we're doing a new fund launch and there's likely to be trading issues and we need to talk about, things with compliance and have people on the floor with the traders, you need to be in a room and do that together. And people will say, well, come on, you're doing it across different jurisdictions. But I still think the rigor of being in the office is different to being sat in your home office.
It's more difficult to build a workplace culture if people are sort of working at home all the time. I mean, the FCA has in the past talked about the massive importance of workplace culture in managing sort of people and financial risk. Is that something you'd be alongside? I mean, you mentioned culture on a number of occasions. Do you regard that as part of your sort of regulatory compliance as well? Focus on
completely. And again, I am very lucky. I have a very compliant culture. I have essentially a bunch of mathematicians, engineers, scientists, and the related support functions who are very rule-driven people. So you explain a compliance or a regulatory rule to them, they'll ask you some questions to further their understanding, and then they follow it because that's what they do. We don't have, that kind of discretionary trader environment where people might want to flex things and challenge things. Yes, you flex things from a commercial point of view, but broadly people want to understand and want to comply. So I'm very lucky with that. And that flows through to the understanding of why the regulators are doing the things that they do. Now, everybody has, gripes with regulators from time to time. We'd love for there to be more global regulatory consistency. I think if you asked any CCO across the market, if there's one thing they'd love, is we'd love standardized regulatory reporting. I cut my AUM in about 5 different ways for 5 different regulators at different points in the year. And if you pick my ADV up versus the filing I make in Singapore, you can't align the numbers. We'd love that. It's never going to happen. At times we question, how much of the information that we provide to the regulators do they actually digest? But we get why they're doing it. Essentially it's market stability and back to the original point about protecting the investor's interests. It's there to provide that stability and certainty.
And by doing it, it imposes a discipline on you as well,
Correct.
Doesn't it? So, yeah. Jersey, we're told, is just about to enact whistleblowing sort of protection for employees. And we hear a lot in financial services. And again, going back to that culture point about the importance of whistleblowing, the importance of speak up cultures. Do you think those are key concepts from a people risk viewpoint?
They are. And I think some businesses struggle with them. And again, I'm very lucky. I mentioned earlier on, we're very focused on errors, not because we have a lot of errors or we make a lot of mistakes, but we see them as ways to prevent future problems. You and I have spoken before about Matthew Said and the black box theory. We very much focus on that. It's about removing the possibility of bigger problems by identifying the smaller problems. Yeah. We have a weekly errors committee. Again, this sounds like we have a lot of errors. No, because we're presenting stuff that most firms would regard as de minimis or wouldn't even be aware of. And because we have this no blame culture around errors, people are encouraged and do report things that would go unnoticed or not cared about at other firms. And we certainly have seen where we've addressed something early in an error cycle, we've definitely prevented it happening later. We've put controls in place that have prevented different variants of the same error occurring, etc. So it's a fascinating process, and it's one that clients sometimes question when we give them the data around errors. Like, well, you're making all these mistakes. We're like, but we're preventing so many more mistakes. And once we get them through that mindset of why we're doing that process, they appreciate it, and they appreciate, again, the transparency and honesty. When I review our errors log with a regulator, they get very concerned for a minute, and then they understand why we're doing it and what's behind it, and they're actually totally on board with it, and quite often praised for it.
Yeah, it's going back to what Donald Rumsfeld leaves out, isn't it? The stuff you don't want to know about, the stuff that you're in denial about. It's easy to say, isn't it? The idea that we want a speak up culture, actually fostering it and living it is a slightly more difficult thing to achieve, isn't it?
It is, but people see that even when we've had a big issue, because we genuinely have a no blame culture, they come to us with everything because they see it as a way of preventing the future problem for the firm and for them. If I identify this problem that I've seen early in the process, I'm not going to cause a big problem for myself later. And we say it time and time again, to the point that people believe it. And we get, all the way across the firm, from the most junior members of staff to the most senior, they take the errors process seriously. And they report the stuff because they know it's preventing something or potentially preventing something down the line.
And are there downsides to that sort of open outcry, speak up culture? Do people try and weaponize it ever?
We've not had that, but I can see that problem. I could see it. But again, it's back to our ethos of being open and transparent. So even if someone tried to weaponize something that we'd found or an error that was discovered, to your point, whistleblower to a regulator or whatever, our approach with all of our regulators is open and transparency. So yes, if we have made a mistake, it's a genuine mistake, and we'll take you through the process of why we didn't think it was a mistake to start with. And then when we did find out it was a mistake, what we've done to fix it and to prevent it happening again.
And is there a problem with sort of the louder voices in your organisation crowding out the quieter ones? How do you get those with sort of less confidence to speak up?
I think because we don't have that ego in the firm, and again, this is tone from the top, Lada's one of the most brilliant people in hedge funds, but she'll listen to any voice in the room as an equal. So that creates the confidence across the firm for everybody to have an opinion, speak up. We're very much for ideas from anybody and kind of taking in anything we hear. So I think that the junior members of staff just grow up in that culture where they know that seniority is irrelevant. I always tell this story about, to kind of illustrate that point, everyone does just what needs doing. It's not about hierarchy, which fosters that culture of trust and and confidence in all the staff. I've seen Leda in the kitchen doing the dishes before because they needed doing, and she was there. Now, when everybody sees that, they understand there's no hierarchy. They understand that just because you're the most junior member of the team doesn't mean that your opinion's not important.
Yeah. And in terms of that no blame culture, how do you go about fostering that and giving people the sort of confidence to sort of own their errors? It's that must be the most difficult bit.
When they see there's no consequences.
Yeah.
We've had relatively serious issues in the past. Issues where perhaps in other firms there might have been disciplinary procedures off the back of them and stuff like that. But that's not our focus. Our focus is what happened, why did it happen, and how do we prevent it happening again? And then we train that person. If it was an individual error or if it was a team error or a collective failure or whatever, we train to prevent it. But it's about, I always say to my team in particular, the whole point of development and growth is you become the best you can be for the company in your time with us. And at some point people move on and develop their careers and go somewhere else, and they'll take what they learned from us into another firm and hopefully foster a part of our culture there as well. But you should always be continually developing your staff so that they make less mistakes, understand things better, can provide more to the firm. And that collaborative approach gets more out of everybody for the company.
Yeah. And into the future, we simply seemingly can't move now for things like AI and its various applications, which apparently are far more than sort of pictures of cats. AI is obviously transforming the financial services industry and the hedge fund industry in particular. How are you seeing that sort of at Systematica?
We're massively excited by it. And oddly, I think I'm the most excited by it because, yes, there are some super sexy investment, methods and techniques that can be utilize AI, and our head of data has all sorts of very interesting projects he's working on, alpha generation with AI models and data extraction, all sorts of stuff. And then we just rolled out ChatGPT Enterprise across the firm the other day. And I spent a day basically where any task I was doing that didn't require me talking to someone on a phone, I used AI for it. And it blew me away. My level of understanding and technical proficiency with it is relatively low level. But in the legal and compliance area, policy review, board minute production, regulatory updates, horizon scanning, it's insanely powerful. But we have to remember it's a tool.
Yes. Yeah.
You have to have guardrails. You have to have, professional uses policies, etc. And you also have to have that human element. It's there to make us more efficient. It's like when the internet first came out, and we suddenly stopped having to go down the law library to look up cases, and we could just look them up online and search them or whatever. It's just a productivity tool. I think for now, the fears about making people redundant and stuff like that, are way off. But it's certainly making life easier in my area for the very time-consuming, mundane tasks that we have to do. Back to the regulators. They say if it's not written down, it didn't happen or it didn't exist. So, the focus on board minutes and policies and procedures will always be there. And AI is just going to help us do that much more efficiently. Because at the end of the day, the focus of an investment management business shouldn't be producing board minutes to talk about its investment management process. It should be about managing the assets of clients and making money for them. But the regulators require us to keep books and records and what have you. That brings an interesting point about the use of AI, particularly in the maintenance and recording and transcribing of everything that perhaps wouldn't have been caught before. There's a concern that, from an NFA books and records point of view, you're suddenly capturing tons more information permanently that you didn't previously.
You become even more transparent, which comes with it some risks, I guess.
Yeah, but again, back to my point, if you're not doing anything wrong in the first place, or you have an ability to explain what you were doing and why you were doing it, it shouldn't be a problem.
And do you think AI is going to change how people behave, your colleagues behave?
It could do. I think the jury's out on that one for now. I think, to your point about not using it for silly stuff, I think, in the same way as,
there's got to be space for that, though, isn't there? I mean,
yeah,
it's
I think in the same way that people had to learn not to, look up daft things on the internet, they have to learn to, not produce silly pictures of people with AI all the time during work time. But I think it's going to make us more efficient. I think, to your point about, stress and work-life balance and all that sort of stuff, I think it's going to give us the ability to perhaps have more time and to think about the more important things that we need to.
And do you think it's going to change what you need from your advisors and other counterparts?
I think I said to someone the other day, it might kill external COSEC off, or it certainly might. It might make it a lot cheaper or easier to bring in house. I think, there's always going to be a place for professional advice in whatever area, because at the end of the day, and this is the difference between in-house and external, particularly in the legal sphere, I only see my business. I don't see across a spectrum of businesses, which the lawyers and the regulatory counsel and the regulatory advisors do see. So I don't have that ability to understand how other businesses might have interacted with regulators or how other businesses might have done X, Y, and Z. And there will always be a place for external advice there because they see across the whole spectrum and have different thoughts and different, ideas about what to do. I think it will certainly streamline a lot of the more basic processes, but there will always be a place for, if I have a very complex employment issue, AI is not going to solve that for me. I'm still going to pick up the phone and speak to you and, and look for the advice of your, many, many years of experience and those of your colleagues at the firm. If I have a really complex regulatory issue that I've not seen before, getting AI to do a search for me or asking it a bunch of questions, it's not going to solve it. It's that
might give you a way into it, but
but it's not going to give me that, what's the regulator said unofficially about X, Y, and Z. And this is still why, being in the room with people is important because it's those interactions. It's one of the things I sometimes struggle with being based in Jersey because a lot of my peer network are based in London. So I do travel back just to talk to people, just attend industry events and have those conversations that never make it into briefing notes or, into guidance and stuff like that. It's just that little flavour of what people are doing and how they're doing it.
The context, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's virtually all we've got time for. So I'd like to thank Ben for coming in to talk to us for what was a really thought-provoking conversation. If you'd like to speak to Carey Olsen or any of our lawyers about any of the issues we've covered today, please do get in touch. Or, as ever, if you've got any ideas about topics we could cover in future, please do let us know.